It is about milk. We're live. I don't know what is the thing. Like I feel like no one there other people don't know, and then other people aren't explaining it to me, and I have no idea what's going on.
Me
You
neither.
know what makes this even funnier is you were just feeding your newborn.
Is it about a shortage?
I don't know. I just saw, what is it, Adam
Uh-huh.
.dev, like with soy milk and like talking about almond milk and like you can't milk an almond.
Yeah. But how did it become such a big thing? Like I'm just so confused how milk became like the topic for everyone.
Maybe it's the new Got Milk commercial.
Is there a new one?
I'm just like, I don't know.
I don't know.
If you're in the chat, please explain this to us.
Yes, if you know the current status on milk, let us know. I also ought to get Amy, can you take a screenshot of me like
Yeah. Do you want me to do it in like YouTube or Twitch or StreamYard?
You just do it in StreamYard, yeah.
Okay.
Just click the window.
Everybody smile, photo op. Awesome.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
In other news, there's an upcoming SDK that Matthias from the Learn Build Teach Discord has been working on in collaboration with Cloudinary and Colby, and it's kind of a port of the next Cloudinary SDK to SvelteKit. So the next Cloudinary SDK lets you do all the image optimizations and transformations that Cloudinary does. It also has an OG image component, which allows you to do all those same things, but to generate the OG image for your SEO stuff.
Very cool.
And it's really nice. And so anywhere they're doing a port of that to SvelteKit, which is really cool. So,
do you have a link I can share?
I had a link earlier. Let me see if I can grab it. It's let me see if the SEO value is there yet. Cloudinary SvelteKit.
I didn't see it. I just tried to use the Googles.
It was in our general channel earlier.
Okay.
Pause. Wait for it.
I saw him ask for help.
Yeah. Okay, continue to wait for it.
Oh, we're waiting. Anxiously.
Oh gosh, this is a lot of...
No pressure.
There it is. Svelte-cloudinary.vercel.app. I'll put it in the...
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Alex on YouTube, what's going on? How's it going?
He said good evening. So, Ruben, I'm going to guess that Alex is on your side of the world.
Yeah, probably. It's 5 o'clock. So, yeah.
Fortunately, Ruben asked me about time travel because the calendar invite was for 9 o'clock his time.
And I was like,
oh, really?
Yeah, I was okay with it,
happened.
but then
now it's only 4:30.
So funny story. I turned up to a podcast recording one day late because of time zones. So it was scheduled for midnight my time, but I don't know if it was midnight the day before or the day after. I got confused. So I went to bed, and then I got a message like the following day. I was like, "Hey, you didn't turn up to the podcast." I was like, "What do you mean? It's tonight."
You're like, "Nope."
Oh, no.
So yeah, that happened. Time zones are fine.
Let me ask you a question about living on another part of the world. Is it annoying that you have to use the American spelling when you're coding?
Do we?
Oh, do you not?
Well, what
can you write CSS color with OUR?
Yeah,
you can.
The things that are obviously standards and variable that are like APIs and standards and SDKs, yes. But
okay,
I have seen when I'm writing documentation and when I'm writing comments and things that, the British spelling can also be fine. You'll find some funny variable names like serialize and deserialize in different British spellings, and people will be like,
with an S is the British spelling, yeah.
And people will be like, this is spelling correctly. Especially the spell check from VS Code will tell you this is not spelled correctly. So, yeah,
Does the spell checker for VS Code have a specific English?
Queen's English?
Is
it called the Queen? Is it called the Queen's English now, or is it the King's English? Because there's a king.
I haven't thought about that. I think it will be the King's English. There are a lot of things changing that we don't really take. We take for granted that the Queen was here for like so long that even like the post boxes, the stamps, all of that has to change, and nothing has changed so far because it will take time.
Interesting.
But yeah, like I never thought about, is it the King's English now?
Mhm.
Like, actually, yeah, it is.
Interesting.
It's the
Well,
Queen who's
and
in
let
the
me
name
ask
anymore.
another question. This is just
Tell me everything about.
if King Charles dies, does Camilla become queen or does Prince William become king?
Prince William will become king.
Okay.
But then I don't know what Camilla, because if when the king dies, usually the queen mother will, if she's still alive, she will remain as the queen mother. But she's not William's mother. Like,
Right.
it's weird that I don't know
Right.
what's gonna happen, because she's the queen consort. So she's not like the queen; she's the queen consort.
Oh, interesting.
But I don't know what happens when Charles dies and she will become, I don't know, a duchess or no idea. My knowledge thing as well.
Hopefully, okay. This is always fun when I can preface conversations like this. Hopefully, this isn't offensive. I listened to the book Spare, and I loved it. I don't know what the take is on your side of the world with that, but I really enjoyed reading about Prince Harry's story and current events that I remember, because we're about the same age. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, there was. I mean, it was all over the news here. A lot of people read it, but to be honest, that's always like that with the royal family. There is always something going on, and some controversy, and someone saying something, and it's like the normal. Like the royal family is always on the spotlight, and people talking about them. So
well, and that's kind of what he talked about in the book. He's like, they're always trying to stir up stuff about the royal family, whether it's true or not.
And he's doing it. I mean, he did it. That's the interesting part, That book was exactly that, what people, expect from the royal family, just having some controversy and something to talk about. But I'm getting my British citizenship soon. Like, very hard to say. You have to do an exam. So it's like knowledge, like trivia knowledge. It's called this Life in the UK test. Anyone who has settled in the UK know that exam is just ridiculous. It's just
hard or easy.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And
that's what they say about the American exam too. Really? Like I think most Americans wouldn't be able to pass it. Exactly, no, like 100% wouldn't.
Exactly. So my wife, when I was doing it, you can do like a mock test, and she wouldn't know half of the questions. They're like really obscure history and legal terms and customs and things like, what are these things? So it's an interesting one. I passed it, so I'm really good at pub quizzes now. Like I'll be like telling you trivia about the UK and history, or you want right now.
Well, Amy, we need to schedule our next trip back to the UK.
Oh yeah, I want to actually see something when I go.
You want to see something?
Yeah, because all I did was I went to the conference. We went to a conference in London. I landed, drove to the conference center. We did go out at night occasionally to go to like a dinner spot, but then we like the most I saw of London was in a cab at 4 o'clock in the morning driving to the airport. And I was like, oh, there's Big Ben.
You definitely need to come back. So fun fact, and actually I did it for a conference last year. I used to be a tour guide like 10 years ago. I used to take people around London. And at React Advanced conference, the organizers were like, hey, would you like to take the speakers and some people out for like a tour? And I was like, well, I haven't done this like in 10 years, but let's do it. And it's fun just to go around places and just, again, telling you fun facts that you're not finding on the internet, like things that I've learned and heard from other people. That's fun. So definitely, if you come, let me know, because
yes,
I don't do that anymore, but sometimes I just take people around.
So where's your citizenship previously?
So I am from Colombia.
Okay.
I was born in Colombia, and I moved to the UK about 11 years ago.
Okay.
So
awesome.
One of my first jobs was actually doing the tour guiding thing.
That's awesome.
And it was fun to learn. And London is a really special city, so it's a nice place to go.
Yeah.
And people. Yeah.
I was gonna say, James, we can officially start, but first, look at Ruben's shirt. Is it not awesome?
I got this from a meetup, and I thought this is probably one of the best swag, like free T-shirts I have, and the quality is not even that bad. And it's just nothing else.
Yeah.
Just this. It's great.
Yeah, it's just no comment.
Just a tip for people, creating swag. Less is better. Less is more. It's a great t-shirt.
Quick question from the chat from Michael. Is it easy to find a first job as a front-end developer in the USA? I doubt any one of us is educated enough on the difference in searching for front-end developer jobs in the US versus another country. I doubt that's I'm not. So I can't particularly say. I think first jobs are typically more difficult than like second, third, and next steps in your career. So I would say that's definitely one of the more difficult ones. Things that I always say: continue to network, get involved in the community, continue to learn, continue to build stuff for your portfolio. Building is the best way to learn, and staying on top of what's going on in the ecosystem by just being in the community is huge. So those are the things that I would recommend. Any quick ones from you all before we officially get started?
Persistence. Don't get discouraged.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
Or
that job.
Or get discouraged and just keep doing it anyway. Because it's going to be frustrating, and it's going to be hard probably, but you'll have to continue to do it and have persistence to get there. And in the end, it will be 100% worth it. So Alum Gear on YouTube, welcome as well. So we've got Ruben on to talk about micro-frontends. We talked about micro-frontends a while ago, but this is still something I don't know much about. So this is a particularly interesting topic, I think, of going from the risk perspective. So I'm excited for this, and we will officially get going. If anybody has questions or comments throughout, please just leave them in the comment section. I will, and Amy will be, and maybe Ruben as well, paying attention and reading all those. I'll be responding to some as well, and we'll put links in there as we can. But if you have questions, just make sure to ask away, and we'll try to get them answered. We already did did you do the multiple goodbyes and hellos and that sort of stuff, Amy? Okay, cool. We need to talk to another group that does live podcast episodes and see how they do it, or just watch another live podcast episode and see what they do if they have guests. So yeah, we'll get there. All right, cool. I'll go ahead and kick it off. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web development and design with a little bit of zest. And this episode, Ruben is going to join us to talk about the risks of micro-frontends.
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compressed.
What's up, everyone? My name is James Huquick, and I am a full-time technical content creator.
What's up, everybody? Oh, I said what's up. I took your title.
We can have the same thing. It's cool.
Hello. My name is Amy Dutton, and I am a lead maintainer on the Redwood core team. And today we have a fantastic sponsor in Contentful. So Contentful is a headless CMS. And the awesome thing about Contentful is it really makes everybody happy. It makes your marketing team happy. It makes your business people happy, and it makes your developers happy. It gives everybody the tools that they need in order for your website to succeed. In fact, it's used by some very popular names like DocuSign, Plaid. So it is a great service. I encourage you to check it out. And special thanks to Contentful for being a Compressed FM sponsor.
Yes, thank you to Contentful. And today we are joined, as we said, by Ruben, who's going to walk us through. I'm kind of curious where this goes, because I talked about this beforehand. Don't know a whole lot about micro frontends. I have general ideas, but especially don't have the knowledge to go deeper into what are the risks and things people should consider before they go down that route, which I assume this topic is coming from personal experience and wanting to let other people know things they can consider before potentially going down that route. So Ruben, welcome to the podcast. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about your background?
Sure. So my name is Ruben Casas. I'm currently a staff engineer at Postman, and I have been doing micro frontends for a while. I was previously at American Express, and I was working on a micro frontend framework there, just basically maintaining what American Express used to do for the micro frontends, and also joined Postman to implement micro frontends there and trying to scale. Anymore, my background, I like complex problems. Not many people, well, people do, but I like the complex problems at scale, which is where micro frontends are a really good tool when companies are big and there are issues at scale. Cool.
That's a great differentiator, because I was at that conference
Which one?
In that
You can
conference.
call it,
Speaking
you
of
can
which,
call
can
it
I
that conference.
Yeah,
because
please give them a quick shout out.
can I do a
Okay.
quick interjection for
Yeah.
my coffee sponsor, which is that conference?
Oh.
This is coffee from Clark from that conference team. So if anybody's interested in that, they make some pretty good coffee and have an amazing conference. Continue.
Next month, right? You can
Yes.
still get tickets in the Dells in Wisconsin. But
Yep.
this particular that conference that I went to was in Austin, Texas. I was talking to our friend Brad Garapi, and he works for Atlassian, and he made the comment that there are so many different problems that people encounter when you're talking about working at scale. And sometimes it's hard to find types of content that will recognize that and help you find the answers that you need, because a tutorial problem is very different than a enterprise problem.
Yeah. And it's hard to teach that too. I think like that's a challenge from a content creation perspective, because you want to introduce people to stuff, but it's really hard to teach at scale problems when you're not working on things that are at scale, if that makes sense. Really quickly, Ruben, this is not quite the topic yet, but I do want to kind of get your take on this. Staff as a title for any role is one of those titles I think that a lot of people, including myself, look at as like, you know, as an individual contributor, that's one of the higher titles that you can have. Any kind of thoughts on being at a staff level in your career? Any suggestions for people that are looking to kind of progress in career titles to that level?
Well, it's the next progression in the technical direction. So it's very, very hard to define what a staff engineer is, but there are many paths. And usually in the industry, you choose you either go engineering, people management, etc., or you go the technical path. And I think staff is just the next step from the senior engineer, where you operate in a more like larger scale within the company, not just within one team, but the company in general. And that is if you want to keep your technical skills, and usually is more to do with architectural decisions, keeping the bigger picture on, and like moving the company towards the right way, the right place from the technical perspective. So you operate at like a higher level than not just your team. It's more like a company-wide initiative where you'll be talking to many teams, many people, and you have that understanding of the overall technical aspect of the company where you work at. It's not the next step will be a principal engineer, and then you have the roles in companies very, very, very much. It's that like really difficult to pinpoint what is what where. But if we put it as is the next step, when you're a senior engineer and you want to go next, what is next, then you will be operating at a larger scale with a larger part of the company, multiple teams, and keeping that technical direction.
Love that. I've always described it as your sphere of influence grows, which is exactly what you're saying. Like you're able to influence not just yourself in terms of writing code and solving a problem. You're able to influence not only a team like your team, but you're able to influence multiple teams and across the company. So I love it. That's exactly kind of how I think about the progression of software developer titles in their career.
That's right. So it's there is a really good book, actually. You know, you mentioned that there is a good book which is Staff Engineer that people can read if you're interested in this, where it explains what it means to be a staff engineer. Cool. And there is one word there that is really crucial that I learned, which is being glue. Like you don't know exactly what you do, but you are the glue that holds things together. Yeah. So that's a really good quote from that book, which is Staff Engineer.
Cool.
Is that by O'Reilly?
It's about
Will Larson.
Yes, that's exactly that one.
I'm going to share a link.
I saw Amy's eyes as soon as you mentioned the book. Her eyes were like searching for the link, so we'll have that available for people. Do you want to kind of kick us off by giving an idea, an overview of what micro front-ends are? Like I've worked with microservices before. I've never worked specifically with micro front-ends, but I think for a lot of people, including mainly myself, like micro front-ends is maybe something they've heard of, but probably have very little actual context for what that actually means. So do you want to give us just a quick overview of what that is?
Yeah, so and probably because we haven't heard it, it's because it's a very specific problem, a solution to a problem, again, at scale. So, and you mentioned microservices, and microservices are exactly like the parallel. Companies have tried to split their applications into more composable modular pieces. And we have done that in the back end. So if you imagine the back end, when they moved from microservices, they split the front end and the back end, and the back end was split into microservices for larger companies. But if you think about it, the front end remained as a monolith. It remained as the single unit of deployment, and that was fine, or is fine for a lot of companies. But when the company also grows so much that front end starts growing and growing and growing, and things start to break, then people start thinking, okay, is this microservice architecture good for to solve this problem? Can we apply it to the front end? Can we get similar benefits in terms of team autonomy, independent deployments, making sure that you don't they can develop and ship faster? Like it's not something that is preventing us from moving faster. That's basically like the comparison between what is micro-frontends and microservices. Very, very similar, but applied to the front end. And the official definition is splitting your front-end application into modular pieces that can be deployed independently, but at the end they are composed into a greater whole, like an application that for users they don't realize it's micro front-end, so it's a single unit. Everything comes together at once, and the users will not see any difference. They will just see the same application.
It's another. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe this gets into the risk side of it that alluded to with the title, but how do you prevent, say, like the same component from being built multiple times just because you're all like using pieces?
So I think this is not a problem with just micro front-ends. If we think about it, a company large enough, a lot of teams will be building their own thing, and then they realize that they are building their own buttons, and then you end up with 20, 30 buttons that people are building. So this is not a problem with micro front-ends, but it's also a problem that is solved with a really good design system. And I have to mention design systems are awesome, and usually
you're speaking Amy's language.
My heart's so happy right now.
And you don't have to use micro front-ends to use a good design system. Design system is the foundation for this. So you need a really good, strong design system where you are creating your atomic components, like building blocks for you to build the applications. So as you said, you are not building the same thing over and over again. Now, how do they fit with micro front-ends? Is they are the building blocks, but micro front-ends are more like composition of all those components, and then the business logic also. If you think about a design system, it doesn't have any business logic, or it shouldn't. Like the components are atomic, and they are multi-purpose, and they don't have a lot of business logic. They are more like Lego pieces. Micro front-ends, you can compose a lot of those components and then create a smaller or bigger application. It doesn't have to be big or small. We get into that. But they have like a purpose. They produce an outcome for the user, and they are usually owned by a team. So this team owns the dashboard, and the dashboard is a very complicated application. And that dashboard is made up of multiple components from the design system. But the dashboard team, they can basically release that dashboard independently, and they don't have to be blocked or talk to anybody else from the company, allegedly.
Well, it's really interesting that you kind of caveated the allegedly there, because I'm wondering if a lot of what you'll talk about is problems that I experienced with doing microservices at FedEx, because it was one of those things where we're just like, microservices, do it. And there are benefits, but also things that you don't necessarily expect become a lot more complicated. And you kind of hinted at like, allegedly one team owning one piece can ship an update, blah, blah, blah. But you also have to remember all of these other pieces are potentially have some dependency on this piece. And so if an API changes or a version changes or anything like that, it's you're still having to coordinate with these other people to make sure they're on board. And there's like best practices with backwards compatibility and all these things, but it's still a very complicated network of things that, like you said, have to be pieced back together eventually.
That's right. And we're getting into the risks, but what I have to say is the architecture is definitely more complex. So I have to say complexity is one of the main downsides, as you mentioned. It becomes more complex. I think I remember someone said the best thing about microservices and micro-frontends is that your teams don't have to talk to each other. But then the worst thing about microservices
is that they don't talk to each other.
Yeah, is they have, they don't have to talk to each other. So that's the problem. That it would require a different level of maturity, and the teams have to learn that with the responsibility, with the benefit of independence, comes also responsibility of making sure that you are integrated and that you don't break contracts and that you are not breaking changes, etc. So there are a lot of benefits, but also when things start to get connected, which is another risk, they start becoming even harder to maintain than if they were a single unit.
There's an interesting question in the chat, which is maybe slightly, so maybe we'll do this question, then we'll come back to like diving deeper into the risks. And one of the things I also want to talk about before I forget is like, or ask in a minute, is like, what are issues at scale that people don't consider? Like amount of API requests coming in, hitting limitations, database queries, hitting limitations, whatever that is. But really quickly, Goose in the chat mentioned or asked, could integrating a headless CMS be considered an example of using a micro front end on your site? And I'll take this like one step further back. A lot of what we do now is we use third-party services to do different pieces of our application for authentication or headless CMS content or payments with Stripe or whatever it is. And it kind of it feels similar, right? Like somebody else is owning these pieces and we're having to integrate and bring those together. Does that sound similar enough to kind of draw that parallel to you?
There is a big difference. So when you talk about headless CMS, that is the backend, and we have the front end that consumes content on the CMS. So that is the split of front end and back end are two separate things. Cool. Now, the difference is, and this is a very big misconception with micro-frontends, is that it's not about a technology. The micro-frontends architecture is more about solving an organizational problem. When your companies are growing so fast that you are unable to move fast and deliver value to your users because it's so big that you can't really make that application run, and you will have a lot of problems with CI and a lot of problems with people making a modification, small tiny change here and then breaking something else there. And if you think about it, this is not a purely technical problem. It's more like an organizational scale, companies growing, multiple teams, hundreds of developers problem. And then micro-frontends is the technical solution to try and alleviate and fix those problems. So that is the main misconception. Like when we, as engineers, we love to have that technical and challenge, and when we hear micro-frontends, we immediately think about, okay, what's the technical aspect of it? What's the technical solution, or what does it look like? But actually, it's more of an enabler for to fix an organizational problem. When you have hundreds of developers, what do? Is that side of one of the aspects of it, at least.
I think I've known that internally, but it's very interesting to have that be explicitly explained, like a technical solution to a non-technical problem of like the growth in teams and how to keep people in sync, but most importantly, like ability for individual teams to continue to do their work and not be held up by other teams, which still is like semi a myth because there are dependencies, because you have to know, like, again, versions and different things like that of what other people are doing. But really quickly, like what are some of those like high level issues that teams and or technical projects hit at scale? Like, is it database? Is it your server? Is it not being able to process things fast enough? Like, what are some of those things that we like when I'm just doing a YouTube video to teach people something basic? What are some of the things that I'm not considering because I'm not being used by a million different people?
Well, there are two aspects, and I think you mentioned most of the issues that you encounter with the backend. So when we talk about the backend, if we already split the backend into microservices, then the next evolution of your architecture will be look at micro-frontends for your front end. So the technical limitations that you hit at scale for the backend are very complex. As you mentioned, database, throughput, all of these things. If you have moved your front end out of that, then your backend team will be able to scale and give you the right throughput and the right resilience of the system to handle millions and millions of users and traffic. If you think about it, the front end, even if it's like a server render application, you have a problem with scaling of that server, but you can handle quite a lot of traffic there. And even with monoliths, I'm talking about micro front ends, monoliths can handle a lot of traffic as well. And they also work fine. There are many cases where a single monolithic application is serving millions and millions of users. I think one example, if you didn't know, this is a fun fact. Stack Overflow, it runs on a monolith and is on-prem. They don't use microservices. They don't split the backend and front end. It's just a single monolithic application. And
Wow.
that's millions of users every day. I mean, maybe less now that ChatGPT is around. I'm not sure. but that's one case, and where they just steal a monolith. Another case is like Ruby on Rails monolithic applications like Shopify, and I think GitHub for a long time was a single monolith built on Ruby on Rails, and they managed to get a lot of traffic through those monoliths. And again, that's not a problem, because if you think about it, the technical solution in that case could look very, very different. But if you look deeper and see, can they develop and deploy independently the front end and back end, and also the front end multiple pieces? If they manage to solve that problem, great. I will be like, well, they managed the problem better. They have an organizational structure that is not that big of a deal. They managed somehow to make it work. But if your organization is already using microservices and you are finding that the front end became the bottleneck now, like the front end is now taking, 1 hour to build, you can't release every day because it takes a lot of things to happen for you to be able to release. Like the CI/CD takes long, running the test is long. And also one of the main problems is that it's so big that it's now all interconnected. So you are not able to make changes without affecting the rest of the application. And that's the main downside of this. And this is where micro-frontends are like, okay, if we split this apart, can we make changes independently and more confidently that it's not going to affect something else in the application?
What was your journey to onboarding to micro front ends? I think you said before Postman you were at American Express, and I think you said you did micro front ends there. So was that something that you were part of the conversation to choose and adopt from scratch, or was that something you walked into at either place? Were you ever part of the conversation to make the decision to go that route?
At American Express, I joined when it was already in progress. So They already have like a decision and the framework. But the fact that they went that way a long time ago actually was one of the first companies trying this flavor of micro frontends, because this is the other thing. Micro frontends are not that new. We have been doing certain flavors of it for years. Like iframes, if you think about it, iframes are encapsulated, and you can kind of deploy applications into a separate place and then combine them with iframes.
Yeah.
So it has been out like a concept for a while, and server-side includes is another example of kind of stitching things together. But it was only until like 2015, 2016, which was what by the time when Amex started looking into it, when there was an article by Martin Fowler, his website, and the ThoughtWorks company came up with this concept when they first used the term micro front ends. And it was because they talk about a lot about microservices, and they saw a lot of companies, Amex included, and a lot of companies just building this new type of architecture where they were just giving these individual teams the possibility to develop and deploy these applications independently. So that's when started. And at Amex, there were many iterations, and I learned the reason I'm talking about risks is because I learned how to implement something incorrectly. So you learn how to make it properly. A lot of the place I've learned about the risk is that this architecture implemented incorrectly is very, very dangerous, because you could end up with you have a problem, right? You want to go fast and you want to develop and give independence. But if you don't decouple that application and your teams are still tightly coupled, you have now a distributed monolith. A distributed monolith is basically, and it's the same in microservices, is basically you now, instead of deploying once, you need to deploy multiple small pieces to get the same outcome, which is a consistent application. And a story, and this is from one of those cases. One senior engineer came to me once and said, "Oh, well, I hate Micro-Frontends; they don't work." And I was like, "Okay, what is the problem?" It was like, "Okay, before we had this application, we used to deploy it, and that's it. Now with Micro-Frontends, we have all these modules, like independent Micro-Frontends. We have 70, and the application wasn't that big. I looked at what the application did, and it was like, it's just a dashboard. It has 5, 6 different pages, but it has 70 modules that they had to deploy independently. They didn't even have 70 developers, right? They have a couple of 2 or 3, 4 teams, and they were like, listen, this is what happens whenever we want to release. We have to deploy A, B, and C first, otherwise D and E will break. And if we are going through the deployment and then halfway through module Z fails, then we have to roll the whole thing back. And I was like, what a nightmare. That is an absolute crazy system. And I was like, okay, this is not a problem with Micro-Frontends. Is you have a distributed monolith. You have to deploy everything to get something to your users, which is the opposite. The point of Micro-Frontends is that you deploy one module or application that is owned and developed by one team, and they are independent enough to manage that deployment themselves. So that's an example. I love to tell the story because it's not about how the architecture is bad or not. It's about how it's implemented. And a badly implemented architecture is worse than the architecture itself. It's worse than no architecture at all, in my opinion. So that's a fun story on one of the risks. And I think I mentioned is that you may end up with a distributed monolith if you're not careful.
What are some of these other solutions that you recommend?
I have been looking into this. The thing with Micro-Frontends is people don't realize that it's a solution for a really specific problem. So if you have a problem, what I tend to recommend is check what the problem is. First, identify your problem, and then you have options to try to solve that problem. You can have, for example, some companies have adopted modular monoliths. So instead of going really granular, they still have 2 or 3 large application-ish that they combined, and then they have some sort of independence. Monorepos are great as well. They are not. It's not a comparison between monorepos and Micro-Frontends, because monorepos usually are more like how to organize your code. But organizing your code properly could also help you solve some problems, which are, like the application is not very tidy and everything is everywhere and I can't find anything. And it takes me 6-8 weeks for a developer who's joining to find how to change the application. So if code organization is a problem, then a monorepo will definitely help. If the code organization is not a problem, but the team autonomy, like I cannot have one of the teams because they move faster than the rest of the company being blocked by the rest. Like some companies have this concept of having like labs or teams who are experimenting all the time, and they need to be deploying and showing value to the users quickly to get quick feedback. But if you link that to the rest of the product or the rest of the application, which has more stable and predictable life cycles and release trains, then you have a team that is really annoyed that they are unable to put something out very, very quick for the users. And when things go wrong, like when there's a bug, that's another thing. There is a bug that needs to go out very quickly, and you can't because the rest of the application is you are unable to put it into production because you need to go through many layers of testing, approvals, and etc. So yeah, try. My recommendation is there are solutions out there. I have a diagram that I created where it's like an evolution of what you can try, and then you can, before going from monolith to 100% decoupled microservices, micro-frontends, you can try this, making your code and making your application a little bit more modular, more decoupled, tidier. And then if none of that works, then you know that you are at the scale, usually large companies will have multiple teams and hundreds of developers will be like, okay, yeah, we can't do this. We have to have a technical solution for these problems.
I was curious, with micro front ends, do you see bigger breaks or smaller breaks? Because it seems like if there's something that breaks, that it would be smaller because it's only a micro piece. But if there's a bunch of interdependencies, it seems like that could create bigger problems.
And that's the key. So one of the risks is all these interconnected dependencies. Mm-hmm. So if your micro frontends are, again, tightly coupled, then that is one of the reasons you shouldn't go with this approach of this architecture. So the first thing that you need to do for you to be able to adopt an architecture like this is to decouple the pieces. Like, you need to be able to have as much independence as you can, and any dependencies are explicit and they are known, like there are no accidental coupling. For example, the design system, I know Amy likes to talk about design system, but the design system is a dependency that all of these applications will be using, correct? So the design system now became a dependency that if there is a problem with the design system, then you will have to update everybody, correct? Yeah. But if you think about it, the design system should not change very often. So the design system is very autonomous, and you can usually not release breaking changes. And if you do have breaking changes, then obviously you have a separate version and separate plan for migration. But you have that contract, like, you know, you're not going to break it. You know that it doesn't change very often. And you know that if there is something that is depending on the design system, well, we are aware that the design system is something that everybody's using. So we need to we need to be very careful and pay attention to that. The problem is when there are these dependencies that just appear and nobody knows who maintains it, who owns it, what's the breaking changes policy or the version policy. And when you find those and you start integrating with the applications, then you start having this accidental coupling that becomes a huge risk to the system. Because in my example, when I was talking about this distributed monolith, the reason they had to deploy one after the other and the other was because they were all interconnected, right? So if the micro-frontends cannot be independent enough that they can be deployed independently and developed independently, and they depend on multiple other systems to be in place for them to work, then at that point, there is no, you should not go that way, because that is the worst of both worlds. You have a problem that became now a distributed problem, distributed across multiple pieces. So that is going to be really hard to figure out what's wrong and what's breaking.
From the front end side of things, do you use Storybook at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but Storybook is for this component libraries and design system is amazing, because you can test these independent and atomic units, right? And have all these stories that you can have test cases and visual, and you can define the contract. So it's really good for atomic components, etc.
I'm a big fan.
Yes. Yes, really
It's a
good.
perfect fit for you, Amy.
I know.
When I think back to my time at FedEx, and I was there when we were kind of first adopting microservices, one of the bigger issues was less technical, and it was less, I think, on how our teams were divided or set up, although that was potentially part of it. I think a lot of it was culture and what people were used to and expected to do from a development standpoint. To like one of the things that we were starting to add or trying to add was automated testing. And so for people that have never done that before, trying to get people on board to do that on a consistent basis honestly just really didn't work. And you have developers, I think, that are used to doing things that from their perspective successfully for 20 years. So to go through such a big methodology shift can be a big challenge. Is that ever something that you've kind of seen, just like mentality from developers across different teams and how they have to adapt to a new way of working with code?
Yes, and I mean, adapting to change is always difficult. The thing is, if you give teams autonomy, doesn't mean that you are gonna let them do,
Whatever they
anything.
want. Yeah.
Yeah, there has to be some sort of governance still in place. Otherwise, the system will basically just fall apart. And governance is not like being strict and I am just like tyrannic. This is what we have to do. No, it's more like guidance and best practices. And as you mentioned, automated testing is probably one of the best practices that you recommend. These teams, they are not used to it, but we are encouraging them to implement the best practices. So we are giving them like the right tools and the right things that you can do. And mainly at big companies, you encounter something called the platform team or team who is like responsible for making sure everything is in place for other teams and other developers to work and be productive. So you find like they contributing to the productivity tools of the company. The design system is part of like a platform or a team that oversees all of that. And that's what I mean by having some sort of accountability and having that team overseeing or making sure that the other teams are not going to go build their own thing or do their own, but we recommend best practices. And obviously there is a caveat. Teams might not follow that. And that depends on the culture of your company and how you want to enforce that. But the governance is more about best practices, is about giving the right tools to the teams to build and giving that sense of, and we know what the overall product should look like. And when something is not going well, someone must know how to fix it or how to engage the right teams to fix it. So the governance is very important because when you mention micro-frontends, people will be like, oh, I can do. Big example is mixing libraries. I don't recommend it. We'll be like, I want to use Vue, so if I use micro-frontends, and can I use React or can I use Svelte? Technically speaking, you can. There are solutions out there. Like if I show you the technical implementation, there is a solution for that. You can use Vue and Svelte and React and Angular together. And yes, but should you do it? And the answer mostly for companies is probably not, because if you think about it, a company needs to have some sort of first knowledge, being able to do knowledge transfer, being able to share tools. Like if you are using multiple frameworks, then the design system will have to be agnostic or being built on web components or something that is a framework agnostic. So knowledge transfer, sharing the tools, all of that becomes a problem. And what you're gaining is not a lot. Like why there is no reason for a company to be, I mean, it has to be really large and the teams have to be very, very independent and different from each other for you to have an argument of using different frameworks. And now putting those frameworks under the same user experience, that is also really bad, because if you think about it, the user is going to also suffer because a lot of JavaScript is going to be there. There will be a lot of hacks and workarounds to make sure that these things work and connect together. So it's definitely something that I don't recommend it. And the governance part is part of that, like deciding okay, we are going to choose one framework, and we are going to be choosing these best practices and tools and design system to be able to build something that is cohesive. Like it's not going to look like a Frankenstein monster website that it is very evident that it was built by people who don't really talk to each other. So it has to be there. There has to be some sort of guidance. Without guidance, you just become like a mess and chaos.
That's fair. There's a comment from Mark, who has been doing microservices, micro-frontends as well. And he said, one big piece of advice was, I think aligns with what a lot of what you've said, is don't do it without having a design system in place, because then people are basically all over the place doing their own things, and you like have this even bigger segmented pieces of code and components and things that are just further apart from each other, when those specific pieces should be in line and they should come from a central place. Really quickly, this can edit out. Insights on YouTube is asking, what is this about? We're talking about the risks of micro front ends with Ruben. So that's what we're chatting through now. And then there's a question. Maybe this will be the last question to walk through. Goose is asking, are there any changes in engineering org should make to make tightly coupled micro front ends? What are some canaries could you place in your process to catch coupled service during planning?
I mean, to prevent tightly coupled micro frontends, that's the question, right? Like you want to prevent it, not want to make them tightly coupled, because that's the opposite of what
I think so,
I recommend. Yeah. So yeah, to prevent them to being tightly coupled. This is an interesting one because there are tools, for example, in monorepos, there are some tools that will prevent you from importing code from where you shouldn't be importing code, for example. Having separate repositories makes it a bit harder because you need to go and find and import and install, but still there is a risk where you can start importing things where you shouldn't be importing. The process is, I think, designing the system properly, finding your dependencies ahead of time. And this is one of the things that happens very often, is that these dependencies appear because people want to reuse code, and they want to, like we always talk about, don't repeat yourself and create these libraries that are used by multiple people. But in an architecture like this one, that might be counterproductive, because the moment you reuse something, or the moment you try to deduplicate some code that is not meant to be shared, you're introducing coupling. You're introducing a dependency between two systems that should not be connected in the first place. So identifying those is very important, and not abstracting too soon. And I would say, like, do not try to abstract something until you know it's going to be someone is going to own it and someone is going to maintain it. So that's why, going back to the design system is very well defined. You know who owns it, and it's an abstraction that we know that we are introducing it for a reason. But when something is like, oh, there are two parts of the company, and there is a lot of business logic, and we are going to start putting if statements, if this part of the flow, then do that, and then you're sharing that, then now you're sharing your fate. Like, if they change together, they should stay together. That's the rule. If you do things change independently from each other, then they can be independent. But the problem is when you have a lot of things that change together, and to make a change to one, you have to make change to the other, then, well, they should be together. They should not be two separate systems. I wrote a really interesting blog post that I learned from one of the guys who wrote the Micro-Frontend article. And it was like, sometimes duplication in this context is better than having a bad abstraction, because that will lead to coupling. So sometimes it's more cost effective to just duplicate the code. If that will give you independence, then the duplication is worth it. If that will stop you from being independent, then you have introduced coupling to your system.
I like that. There's like deeper conversations, I think, to potentially talk about how and when do you share code? Because that is also one of the challenges. Because I think across different either microservices, micro frontends, there's certainly the potential to have shared or similar logic that could be shared, and deciding when and where and how to do that would be an interesting topic to dig deeper into.
Yeah, definitely. That can be shared, but should you share it?
Yeah.
That's the probably question in this type of architecture. And it's not just code. I'm talking about more like features. So sharing code and sharing like utility functions, I mean, they are just things that don't change very often, and they are things that can be put in an npm package. We all import npm packages from here, there, and everywhere, right? So that's how we share code in the JavaScript ecosystem or in the front end. But when you start sharing business logic, when you start sharing larger and larger parts of the system, at that point it becomes should we share this? Like, is this a good idea, or can we just? What I recommend is start separate, and then if they definitely it becomes a challenge to keep them separate, then combine into one. But the risk is that you start combining and then putting if statements everywhere, you end up with spaghetti code in this dependency as well. So it's a tricky one.
I think we can probably just accept at the end of the day that building software that scales is tough.
It is tough.
Software that scales, like from a technical perspective and from a people and company and culture perspective as well.
Yeah,
Well, and I don't know how many times we said you can do this, but should you?
But should you? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's the main recommendation. Is like, you can, from the technical aspect, you can do many things, but what you need to find out is
which one should you be doing.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, cool. I think we can move into the last section of the episode, which is picks and plugs, where we pick something that we enjoy, we bought, watched, listened to, read, whatever, and then anything that we want to plug for ourselves. Anyone want to go first? It's me. I'll go first.
Okay, good.
So I feel like I have like bad bags under my eyes. I get comments on YouTube.
Oh, it's just because you get comments.
No, I
don't notice them.
I look at them all the time. I'm like, anyway. This may or may not actually have anything to do with that, but I wanted to kind of like potentially help with them a little bit, but also take a few minutes a day to just kind of relax and not necessarily meditate exactly. But anyway, I'll put a link in the chat, a kind of freezer ice pack thing for your eyes. So it's like an eye mask that you can put in the freezer. And so I've done this like twice. So it's not this big, huge, like existential thing for me. But the last 2 days I've spent just 5 minutes on the couch with that on my eyes, laying back and doing like a breathing exercise just to try to, like, there's enough going on with buying a house and having a kid and all these, trying to like do work in between that as well. So it's just my way of trying to take like 5 minutes to myself and kind of zone out, hopefully, and maybe that it has a positive impact on the bags under my eyes. Who knows? But so it was like $8 on Amazon. You just leave it in the freezer, pull it out when you want it, and then put it back when you're done.
Nice. Henry has a heating one. Just stick it in the microwave for a few minutes.
This one can do both, so you can actually put this one in the microwave as well. Yeah, it's got all the flexibility. And then I will plug my Astro course. This is at astrocourse.dev. I've been publishing blog articles to the blog page of that. So astrocourse.dev/blog. And I'm going to be doing more YouTube content to kind of align with that as well. So expect a lot of like JavaScript and Astro focused content. And then if you're interested specifically in the course, at astrocourse.dev.
Awesome. Ruben, you want to go?
Okay.
That means Amy isn't ready, by the way.
No, I'm ready. I'm ready.
I'll go. So on the topic, if you want to learn about this a little bit more, there is a book called Building Micro-Frontends by Luca Mezzarella. He created this book with all his experiences on building a micro-frontend architecture. He's now at Amazon, and he basically is the person to go to when there are some micro-frontend questions. And I know you had Natalia a couple of months ago. So Natalia is a great friend, and I definitely, if you need some resources, her website is amazing, the microfrontend.dev website. There are some more decisions on what to do and what flavor microfrontend you should be using. And I love, we didn't discuss this, but I love that she doesn't use the word microfrontend. Like, she uses the decouple applications concept that is basically similar, But the problem with micro-frontend, with the word micro-frontend, is people think they are small, and then people think they have a different like
idea
concept,
of what that means.
Idea of what that means. Yeah. So I like that the concept that she proposed. Like, let's not call them. I mean, the problem is the micro-frontend term has stick. Like, it's not like a thing that you can remove. But I definitely recommend that website that she wrote on all of these topics. And it's not just micro-frontends, by the way. That the website has a lot of tips for any architecture of front-end application. So take a look. Those are like plugs, but I'm gonna put another plug, which is there is a conference in Malaga in November. I just want to say the CFP is open, and I went to this conference last year. I was invited in Malaga in Spain. It was one of the best conferences I have been to. It was really well organized, and they're going for a mostly female lineup this year. So the CFP is open. If you want to go there, I'll probably attend as well this year. I had a great time last year, so I have to. When something is done well, you try to be like, okay, let's help these people out and make sure that people go. That, I mean, it's in Spain. It's a bit far from you guys, but if you want to come to Spain, that'll be amazing to meet in November. It's called the Way Web Conference. They say again, www. Way Web. Is in Malaga, Spain, in November. Just take a look at the CFP.
Awesome. I am going to pick the Lincoln Lawyer book series. So there's a fantastic Netflix series called Lincoln Lawyer, but I've been reading the books by Michael Connolly, and they're fantastic. So check those out. And then I'm going to plug my Twitter. I know Twitter's kind of crazy right now, but I would love to connect with you online. I'm trying to be more intentional about the content that I put out on Twitter. So my handle is self-teach-me. So I would love for you to follow, DM, whatever that looks like. So
amazing. Cool. Thank you, Ruben, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. If you're listening to the podcast version of this episode, make sure to leave a rating and review if you enjoyed it, to help other people find the podcast and for us to continue to have more amazing guests like Ruben to join us. Thank you again, everyone. In the meantime, that's all we got.
Thank you.
Awesome. And then I know, James, you have a hard stop, so
yeah, we
can go ahead and say our second goodbye quickly.
Yes. All right. Second goodbye. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you all later.